you know, over the next year, we recognize we're going to be investing $1 billion in Ontario, and in order to achieve our mission of healthy and vibrant communities. So our purpose is really to strengthen the capacity of the voluntary sector through our investments and community-based initiatives. We can go on to the next slide, Heather. So collective impact is one of our granting streams. Our foundation has 4 granting streams, and collective impact for us is about changing the landscape, and we support the sector through our investments, but also through capacity building support such as workshops and webinars like we're doing today. Our other granting streams undertake capital projects, seeding new ideas, and scaling proven programs. But for us, collective impact is really about helping support the sector, create system change, and really move the axis on things or problems or issues that they're experiencing.
Okay, so we're going to do another poll. We're going to find out how many of you are an Ontario Trillium Foundation grantee. So you can just look on your screen. The poll is now open. So it looks like about 80% are not a grantee. 13% are Ontario Trillium Foundation grantee, but from a different stream, and we have 9% from our collective impact grantee stream. Back to you, Artie.
Great, thanks, Heather. There we go. So we have 3 basic phases that in collective impact granting. So we fund either phase 1, which is defining the impact, phase 2, organizing for impact, and the third is delivering for impact. And I'm going to go through each of these very quickly. If we can move to the next slide. So defining the impact. So this is the stage where you're really building the case for change and further defining the issue or problem. So it'll likely include things like mapping the system or the landscape, starting to build out your theory of change, pressure testing the initial theory of change, but it'll also include things like identifying who needs to be involved, convening cross-sectoral stakeholders, and importantly, confirming consensus and the common agenda and urgency to move forward. Our funding, as you can see, in this stage is up to $30,000. It's up to 18 months of funding, and we do request, there is a request form and a final report form that is part of the process. Next slide, please. So our next next phase rather, is the Organize for Impact stage. And at this stage, groups will work on developing a governance model, creating a backbone infrastructure, developing, you know, comprehensive plans, and really building out the theory of change, but also ensuring that the cross-sectoral partners at the table, and also thinking about things like how you're going to do internal, external communications, how the collective is going to be managed, and reestablishing a leadership committee and thinking about monitoring. Next phase is delivering the impact, and really this is the implementation stage rather, where you're actually doing it, evaluating it, and learning from it. So you're really delivering on the theory of change, you're monitoring and reporting on the learning, and integrating the lessons learned to iterate your work plans based on results and data. And lastly is communicating learning and results. Next slide, please. So this is currently, we have several collective impact funded initiatives in a variety of stages. What this slide is showing you is the type of themes and issues that we're currently funding, like everything from environmental stewardship to homelessness to youth suicide or sexual violence. So it really is a broad sector, and it represents the 6 action areas that our foundation has chosen to focus on. And you can find more information on that if we go to the next slide, actually, Heather. More information about our action areas, about our funding for collective impact on our website, otf.ca. And again, just to let you know that we are, I realize that there are people on the phone from Quebec and from the States and Western Canada. We fund initiatives that impact the province of Ontario. I just want to be clear on that as well. And over to you and Liz.
Thank you, Artie. The Tamarack is really excited working with the Ontario Trillium Foundation to help build the collective impact granting stream. So if you need any resources around collective impact, we have it, and I really do encourage you to contact the Ontario Trillium Foundation if you are doing collective impact work and see how you can access the funding. So now I'd like to introduce Liz Wheeler. Liz leads the Tamarack Learning Service Division, providing strategic direction for the design and development of learning activities. The Tamarack Learning Division strategically invests in community leaders to co-generate knowledge and become a collective force for social change. Liz is passionate about the power and potential of communities getting to impact on complex issues. Liz is one of Tamarack's highly regarded trainers and has developed and delivered curriculum on a variety of workshops, including collaborative governance, leadership, collective impact, community innovation, influencing policy change, and social media for impact and engagement. Welcome, Liz.
Thanks, Heather, and thanks, Artie, for giving us the overview of the Ontario Trillium Foundation and the Collective Impact funding stream. One of the things that we recognize at Tamarack as part of our partnership with Collective Impact and with the Ontario Trillium Foundation is that we want to build the field of practice collectively. And so we open up these webinars to the Tamarack membership as well as to OTF grantees or potential grantees. And so we're happy to welcome all of you aboard on this call. Next slide. Today we're going to dive a little bit deeper. This is the Diving Deeper series, and so we're going to dive a little bit deeper on evaluation and collective impact. We're really going to focus our evaluation on the early phases of collective impact. So for those of you more experienced, we hope you'll find some things that are helpful in this call and some new tools and approaches. But this is really the focus of it. We're going to highlight some tools and approaches, and then we're also going to look at strategic learning as a part of the evaluation process. So we have one more poll, and this poll is really for us to understand as I start to kind of dive into the webinar. What are some of the biggest collective impact evaluation challenges that you are facing in your work currently? And we have a number of them that we've identified, so feel free to go into the poll. Okay, so we see numbers coming up. One is that we don't know where to focus our work. We're seeing about 28% of you saying that. 22% are saying that we don't necessarily have the human resources to be able to do this work, and 40% of you are focused at population level change. So those are some challenges, and those are, when we do work with groups across Canada and the U.S. from Tamarack's perspective, the shared measurement, the evaluation of collective impact is quite a big challenge for groups that are really trying to work in systems change space. Next slide. So we want to set the context of this webinar, but just reviewing quickly the basic context of collective impact. As we all know, those of you who are very familiar with the collective impact framework, but those of you that are new to it, there are 5 core conditions of collective impact. And collective impact is a framework for changing communities. And so you have to pay attention to these 5 conditions. The folks that you gather around the collective impact table have to think about and agree to what their common agenda is. What is it? And we often ask the question, what's the change that we want to see in our communities? And that question is really instrumental in forming the common agenda. And you also need in the common agenda a common understanding of the problem and how you are jointly going to solve the problem. I think embedded in the common agenda is this notion of being data informed. The data is really critical to community change efforts. That links into the second condition, which is around shared measurement. So we're going to be data informed about the problem, but then we also want to articulate and measure a number of indicators to show that we're making results or that we are making progress on the problem or the issue or opportunity that we framed our common agenda around. The third condition is mutually reinforcing activities. So how are we going to get our partners to not only buy into this common agenda, but actually own it, and through their own practices kind of mutually move the agenda forward and really leverage the skills, the technology, the link to people in the community, their programs and practices in a mutually reinforcing way. Continuous communications is the fifth. So if you're making progress, if you're evaluating your progress, if you're getting to results, you want to tell people, because nothing builds momentum like momentum. And so continuous communications not only plays a role in all of the collective impact, but is really a critical component of shared measurement. And then finally, backbone support. And so backbones in terms of evaluation and shared measurement are pretty critical, because they're the ones that, you know, convene the community around how are we going to measure this. They might build up the shared measurement practice. They might identify the indicators. They might bring people together and collate results. And they are critically important in terms of the strategic learning component. So we know that collective impact happens over 5 phases, and this is something that for those of you in the different elements of your work, you might say, okay, so we're clearly in phase 1. We're trying to assess the readiness of our community to even take on a community change effort. We may be in phase 2, initiating action or organizing for impact. If you think about what Artie said in terms of the funding stream, that's the second funding stream with the Ontario Trillium Foundation. The first is the assessing readiness. The second is organizing for impact, phases 2 and 3. And then finally, 4 and 5 are around the implementation and actually sustaining and renewing. What's really important about this slide is that evaluation and continuous improvement flow across all the phases. So you don't want to leave your evaluation work until your final phase and do summative evaluation. You actually want to look at, are we getting the right people to the table? Is our community really ready? Those are formative evaluation and developmental evaluation questions that you want to be building into your collective impact approach. Okay, I'm trying to move the slides forward and need my little technical assistant here. Oh, okay, so what we've learned and what FSG has learned, they've put together 3 guides to evaluating collective impact, and what they've learned is that evaluation is the big circle, the shared measurement system. Those numeric-based indicators are only a subsection of the whole evaluation practice in collective impact. And so this kind of gives you a little bit more detail. A shared measurement system is both an input to the evaluation, but also can be an object of the evaluation as well. So we know that evaluating collective impact efforts actually looks at 4 core aspects, and this comes out of the guides to evaluating collective impact. So one aspect is the initiative itself. And so for those of you, again, that are in early phases, this might be the place that you're focusing your evaluation on right now. So do we have the 5 core elements of collective impact in place? Do we have capacity? Do we have the right human capacity, human resource capacity? Do we have the right financial capacity to undertake this work? The second area of evaluation would be systems. And so, you know, systems is really looking at both individual behavior change. So, for example, if you're working at the level of poverty reduction in your community, that's your common agenda. What behavioral changes are you expecting, not only from funders in the community, but also from policymakers or also from service providers? You know, could they be looking at more seamless delivery of services across the community, and how would you know it? So looking at what are the changes, what are the funding flow changes, what are some of the cultural norms? And a lot of collective impact initiatives, some of the ones that already articulated that the OTF is funding, the Trillium Foundation is funding, are looking at things like suicide prevention and sexual violence. There are some cultural norms that we're trying to change, the way that our communities look at those issues. And so what are the shifts that we want to get to in those cases? We want to look at the ultimate outcomes of the initiative. These are longer scale changes, and then the initiative's context. So is the community ultimately shifting? Are you seeing a net reduction in the level of poverty? Are you seeing economic factors changing, like more businesses paying a living wage, those kinds of things? And so these 4 elements really are the core of the evaluation practice for collective impact initiatives. FSG, when they were thinking about this, and they put this kind of diagram in their guides to evaluating collective impact. So for those of you that are at different stages in your collective impact work, you want to kind of say, okay, so what should we be focusing on in the stage that we're at? And so in the early years, you want to be focusing on design and implementation. As you move to the middle years, you start to look at those intermediate outcomes, the behavioral change, the system change outcomes, and as you move into the more senior years, you're starting to then look at population level change, because we know that it takes a while to get to population level change. Depending on the indicators that you choose for population level change and the time period of reporting, it may be that you won't get data for 3 to 5 years. And so you really want to think about and develop an evaluation approach, but recognize that you will get different kinds of evaluation results over different time frames. Again, here's another example of that, and also where you want to kind of think about what progress, for whom, how, and why. So in the early years, early performance indicators, and you're going to use a developmental evaluation approach, which is really saying, okay, we're going to try these things, and then, what happened? Did we get the people that we expected? Is the community buying in? Those kinds of questions. You always want to ask the question in the early stages. In the middle stages, you're going to start to look at shared measurement and systems indicators, right? So who's shifting policies? Are we attracting funding? Are we getting the key leaders in our community making statements about this? And it's more of a formative evaluation approach. And then the final phases are really looking at population level change and summative indicators. So I think these 2 slides are kind of helpful for situating where we think about evaluation and how evaluation fits. What you want to do in your progress is that you want to kind of think about, so what are some of the key learning questions that we want to build into our collective impact? And so here are some examples of key learning questions in early stage work and in intermediate outcomes. So, from backbone infrastructure, to what extent and in what ways is the backbone infrastructure providing the leadership, support, and guidance that partners need to do the work as planned? So that's actually a multifaceted question, so I might break it down into sub-questions, but you can kind of see where you want to be asking the questions. Like, you want to ask, and you want to ask the questions in such a way that you actually can get some of those measurable outcomes and build some of that momentum early on. There are questions around impact, there are questions around intermediate outcomes and context on this slide as well. Again, this comes directly out of the guides to evaluating collective impact, and we will send a link around in our post-evaluation email, but we're also going to send you the slides so you can dive a little bit deeper into them as well. Again, we want to kind of spend a second here, or a second or two, really looking at the phases of collective impact and really ask you the question, if you're in the early phase, what are you experiencing? And so we want you to maybe, or early mid phases, we want you to, in the box, the comment box, to send your comments or your questions, or maybe even some of your frustrations about embedding evaluation into your practice, evaluation and strategic learning into your practice. And so we'll come back to those. Heather and Stephanie are capturing those, but we wanted to give you a little bit of thinking time for this. So here's what we want you to do. What questions can you ask to determine what success looks like in the early phases. And again, type your questions and comments into the discussion box on the GoToMeeting platform. We're trying to make these GoToMeetings as interactive as possible, and so we're going to come back to this, but we really want to hear, as you're in your early stages, what are the questions you're asking? Where are you focusing some of your evaluation? What does success look like for you? So the next part of this evaluation presentation is really to make it very practical for you. And so we've come across, and we have been using at Tamarack and in some of our work with other collective impact folks, some tools to build their evaluation skill set or their evaluation tools that we have identified at Tamarack. Again, we invite you as a listener and as a participant, and for those of you that are further along in your evaluation work, are there other tools that you're using and other tools that you're suggesting? And if there are, type them into the comment box, and then when we do our post-webinar email out to you, we'll send you these other tools and links to these other tools. So the first tool is the Outcomes Diary. An outcomes diary can be used in the very formative or early stages of collective impact work. And really, it's what it says it is, right? It's you want to kind of look at outcomes. You want to look at how the community is responding and engaging in this kind of systems change work that you're involving yourselves in. And then you want to figure out, how do you track it? How do you diarize it? And then how do you learn from the results? And so those are the two critical elements of an outcomes diary. Some of the lessons that we've learned as communities have moved this forward is how many partners. It's a great tool to engage partners in the collective impact effort, and for them to report in real time on the shifts that they're doing that is helping to advance the effort. So you're capturing in real time those changes. One of the things we've also learned is that there's a constant flow of changes in systems and community change work. This way of diarizing it or capturing it in a systematic kind of way allows us to really understand, you know, in the last month, these are the changes that we've seen, and these are the patterns that are emerging in our work. For those of you that don't know, I led a collective impact initiative in Hamilton, Ontario, and we used the Outcomes Diary as a tool, and we learned when we started to really be intentional about diarizing our results that in 1 year we saw an increased funding flow to poverty reduction work. So the community increased its funding flow by $25 million in 1 year. And that came from United Way, from the Community Foundation, from the provincial government, and from other sources. And they were all of that funding was focused on the common agenda of making Hamilton the best place to raise a child. We would have never known that had we not been intentional about collecting that data in real time. What's also really critical in a diary approach is this idea of feedback loops. And so you want to not only have the backbone collect the data, but you want to then communicate out to the community what changes you're observing, and also communicate out to your strategic partners what changes you're observing, and also how they're contributing and how they're leading up. So it's a great way to recognize contributions as they flow into the collective impact work. So here's an example. In Hamilton, again, we looked at 3 levels of change: impacts on individuals and households, particularly those living in poverty, impacts on community change systems, and then we were also interested in what was the collective impact work of the Hamilton Roundtable able to shift policies either at the municipal government level, within organizations across the community, or also within other levels of government. And here are kind of 2 examples. We've given you the summative of that change, but I can tell you, as we were tracking the change over time, there were many interventions that went forward to get to rental subsidies for low-income individuals. So we did presentations, our partners did presentations to the City Council, there was an opportunity, etc. So as you diarize over a period of time, you're going to actually see the patterns. And if you are able to see the patterns, then the next time you want to move a systems change forward or a policy change forward, you can say, oh, this happened. We saw these patterns emerge to get the City of Hamilton to put forward $4 million in low-income rental subsidies. How are we now going to influence the City of Hamilton in another kind of way? So it's a great little tool for that, and we'll send the tool around as one of the resources. Some of the success factors that you have to build in are regular collection of results in real time, feedback loops, and then really spending time looking at sense making and patterns. The second tool, and this is a tool that Tamarack has been building over the last year, is a collective impact self-assessment tool. We will again send this out in our post-event email. What we've done is we've looked at the 5 phases of collective impact, and you notice how there is, the backbone or organizational governance, planning, communications and engagement, and evaluation and learning. Well, we took those 4 core areas, we looked at the 5 phases, and then we said for collective impact initiatives to be successful, what do they need to achieve in each of those 4 areas and 5 phases? And so each phase will have a similar page like this where there are 2 to 3 to 4 points, and your collective impact initiative can do a bit of a self-assessment. So you can take this tool and hand it out to all of the folks that you have in your collective impact initiative or your core leadership table and do a self-assessment and then say, okay, so where are our strengths and where are the places that we need to grow? This actually fits really nicely into the early level evaluation of collective impact, because here are some core elements that you can rate yourselves on, and then you can have some indicators of change that can be helpful to you in terms of proving to the community or to your core partners that you're actually making progress in the different across the different phases of collective impact. So it's a baseline, and it can also be a growing element for you. The final tool that, as we were looking at this, we thought would be helpful for you is an evaluation user profile. And so this really begins to say, okay, so if we have funding from the Ontario Trillium Foundation or another funder, or if we have our partners around the table that we want to engage more deeply in our work, we want to ask them the question, what do they hope to get from these evaluation results? So we want to know who's going to use the evaluation, and then what are the questions that they have in that use, and then how are they going to use it? So an evaluation user profile actually has 5 core components to it. The first is, who are the primary users of the evaluation that we're going to engage in? So for example, if you're doing early stage evaluation and you're looking at, did we bring the 5 conditions into play? Do we have enough funding to do this work? Some of the primary user might be your table, your collective impact table itself. And so what kinds of questions would your leaders around your collective impact table want to ask? So what are the major questions? And you could actually do a little bit of a survey of them. What are they going to use the evaluation results for? So when are they going to use it? So it might be that in the early stage work you want to say, do we have enough of these things to actually move our collective impact initiative from an assessing the environment phase, that phase 1, into actually building a plan? So do we have community buy-in? Is the issue compelling enough? So how are you going to use the results? How is your primary user going to use the results? What are their preferences? Do they want to have a big long report? Do they want you to do a survey? Do they want you to just capture the highlights? And so those kinds of things fit within the preference category. And then what's the window of use? So when is the deadline, or when do they need to have that information? the evaluation results to be able to make a decision about go, no go, fund, no fund, those kinds of things. So a user's profile actually helps you frame your early stage evaluation, but the user profile can be used at all phases of evaluation as well. So here's an example that we put together, just thinking about the Ontario Trillium Foundation as a primary user, and so for early stage evaluation. So some of their major questions might be, has the Collective Impact Initiative been able to attract and engage multi-sector partners? Have they been able to develop a plausible theory of change or a plausible common agenda? And how does this Collective Impact Initiative align with one of the action area outcomes that are driving the funding priorities of the Ontario Trillium Foundation, their intended use, their preferences, and also you can see their use period. So it's we didn't talk to the Trillium Foundation, so this is really kind of our take on this, but this is just kind of a working example for you to see how you might move your user profile approach forward. And what's really important in this case would be to engage your contact or whoever is going to be your primary user, to engage them in a conversation looking at these 5 theme areas. Some additional resource things that you can look at, and some additional resource tools or sites to go to are the Tamarack Institute in terms of the Collective Impact idea area. The Collective Impact Forum has tons of resources, and the guides to evaluating collective impact can be found both on the Collective Impact Forum, but you can also Google the guides as well. So Heather, before we move on, we just want to go back a little bit to this question that we had with our listeners or our participants on the webinar. So what are some of the questions that and some success factors that they identified in the early phases?
So we had lots of questions and comments come in. The deans said 10 years working together, what could we achieve as a status for the Natural World Heritage Site when you have other factors coming in that could affect the work that you're doing? Another one is from Julie, the difficult to measure culture. How to measure improvements in the relationship between the stakeholders, your community groups, and others. Chanel and Bryce actually had the same very similar question or comment, is that partners think that evaluation is the end of the day activities.
Yeah.
And funders, they want end stage success early or outcomes that are not realistic in the time frame.
Yeah.
And lastly, Bryce talks about difficulties in identifying behavior change and how to know when that change has happened.
Yeah. So those are really good, and I think that that's we know that collective impact work is it's like a 3D puzzle, right? And there are the 3 elements of collective impact or community change work that we have to pay attention to. One element is the actual conditions themselves. The second element is the context of the community, both where you are right now and what you're hoping to shift. And then the third element is the issue that you're trying to move the needle on. And so, I think your questions, all of you kind of raised that kind of complexity in your questions. I would say tools like Outcome Diary, where you're starting to actually track changes in real time, helps you kind of understand, okay, so if we do want to shift behaviors, what does that look like? So a shift in behavior might be, you know what, one of the things we'd really like to do is to get the United Way to fund our priority, whether it's homelessness or poverty, for example, and so then you start to work at that, and you start to look at, okay, so what is the United Way in our community already funding,
And when you actually do a little bit of assessment about that, you might say, oh, look, they are already funding things that are kind of related to the poverty priority. How can we get them? What are the things then we need to do to get them to fund it in an intentional kind of way that meets the common agenda? And that's an example of a behavior change or a systems change that you're trying to move towards. Another behavior or systems change, and we've seen this a lot in communities over the last little while. I don't know that we've tracked it as well as we could, but we've seen communities come together and they've, brought multiple organizations into a shared environment where they're sharing technology. They might be sharing HR, they might be sharing rent and sharing systems and things like that. Those are behavior changes because there were lots of little things that happened to get them into the shared environment and get their boards to agree to that and to working together, sometimes motivated by finance, but sometimes motivated by really trying to provide better services and outcomes for the populations that they're serving. And so tracking some of those and tracking what happens behind those kinds of decisions, you can do in an outcomes diary, and you can begin to see, okay, so these are behavior changes that we're hoping to move forward. Those cultural changes are really tough. And there's a group in Alaska called Arise Alaska, and it's a Cradle to Career initiative for an indigenous population, the Cook Inlet Tribal Initiative. And they are trying to, so their collective impact approach is really that every child is successful from baby to elder within their tribal community. And they have, educational and progress indicators. They have some behavioral indicators that they've identified. And now they're trying to say, but what does this mean from a cultural perspective? And they're engaging in some really deep conversations around culture. And I think that that's, that would be one of those things that you want to have at your table. What are some of the cultural shifts that we hope to accomplish together? And that's not an easy conversation, but you could look to maybe the private sector in your community and say, what have you guys done successfully to build a culture in your business? Or look to larger institutions in your community and say, how have you guys focused on culture, and what could we learn from that? So again, not focusing your evaluation so much internally, but then also looking externally and where are the resources in our community that we can draw from. So hopefully that gives you some things to think about in terms of your early phase evaluation. These are really tough. At Tamarack, we use this idea of R&D, right? And most of us think about research and development, but at Tamarack, I think about it in terms of rip off and duplicate. And when I was doing this collective impact work in the city of Hamilton, I would be on the internet all the time scanning who was evaluating what in the area that I might be evaluating in, what were they doing, and how could I, learn from their evaluation plans and that kind of thing. At Tamarack, we have a collective impact community of practice, and we also have an evaluation community of practice. And for those of you that want to dive deeper into either collective impact or evaluation, these are opportunities for you to do peer learning, to access resources, to learn about other approaches in terms of evaluation and learning plans that other collective impact initiatives have put together. I think we have a couple of really good examples of evaluation and learning plans from early years initiatives, the first 2,000 Days initiative in Calgary, and also a child and youth initiative in Vancouver or in Victoria that we might be able to share as examples of evaluation and learning plans in the post email that we send out to folks. So finally, before we wrap this up, we're going to maybe spend a couple more minutes just on some questions that we have. And this is where I know that I need glasses because the type that I'm looking at is really small. So why don't you start me off?
Okay, so there's a question from Erin, and she asks, who develops the indicators, and where are these finalized?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Erin. So, you know how I said at the very beginning that your common agenda needs to be evidence-based, right? And that's a really critical point around collective impact, because John Kania would say that collective impact is all about consistent and measurable progress at scale. And so you want to say, okay, if we want to move the needle on homelessness, we need to know in our community how many people are homeless, right? So when you're setting up your common agenda, you got to kind of understand what the data is telling you about that issue going into it, whatever the issue is. You want to map your community a little bit to see who's already delivering services and programs. And then as you begin to think about, okay, so what's the population level indicator, you might bring a group of folks in your community who have some expertise in setting or looking at population level data, bring them into an evaluation conversation and say, okay, so who in our community is collecting information about homelessness? Where's the data? How often is it collected? And what are some things we need to consider about whether this indicator versus another indicator is the right indicator for the work that that we want to, the big common agenda that we want to shift. The guides to evaluating collective impact give you some really good hints around selecting indicators. And so I would go to those guides. Some of those hints would look at, how often is that data collected? Who is collecting that data, and is that source verifiable? So if the federal government is collecting the data, then that's pretty verifiable source. If it's someone else and they're an organization in the community that just emerged and they're collecting the data, then maybe it's not so verifiable. So you want to kind of ask those kinds of questions. How often is it collected? If you're working at community change at the neighborhood level, then you want to know, is that data, is that population level data available at the level of community that I'm working at, whether it's at the neighborhood level, at the regional government level, whatever even at sub-neighborhood levels for some of the work that you're doing. So there are some key things that you want to consider in terms of indicators.
Okay, so the next question is from Julie. So what's an effective way to review and analyze an outcome diary?
So the way that I would do it is I would collect the information, and then I would invite our key partners to a conversation. And I would say, so here are the things that we've seen happen over the last, you've reported some of them, we've collected them. What do you think? What are the patterns that you're seeing? What are the trends that you're emerging? What are the things that we should be paying attention to as a collective impact initiative? And really, that's a conversation. And you might have some key questions, and so you facilitate that conversation, or you have an outside facilitator, or if you have the resources for an external evaluator, they support you in that process. But I think you want to focus the conversation around the outcomes diary. What are the patterns that we see emerging? What are the 5 or 6 successes that we've seen? And then how could we use what we've seen to even deepen our results and to move change forward more intentionally in our community?
So we have a follow-up question to that. Who is responsible for filling out the outcomes diary? Backbone, organization, stakeholder?
Yeah. So it depends on how you do it. And, more and more folks are going to an online tool in terms of developing their outcomes diary. And if you have an online tool, then all of your partners can actually add things in real time. So you might want to see what your capacity is. The backbone would initiate it, but then they might reach out to their partners on a monthly basis or on a quarterly basis and ask their partners to complete it online and to submit it, and then the backbone might synthesize and convene the sense-making session. So the backbone does play a strategic role in this, but the partners and community members can be equally engaged.
Okay, so we have another question. Key to evaluation is selecting the issue. Can we select more than one issue? For example, working with CI team table, each organization has an area that could potentially focus on.
So the really critical part of collective impact is the common agenda, right? And so I think what you're talking about more in your question is mutually reinforcing activities that can actually drive the common agenda forward. That's how those two pieces fit together. But at the end of the day, the big it in collective impact is what's the change that we envision together? Do we want to move the needle on poverty, and what does that look like? So me, organization X, I can play a role in doing this. Business, I can pay a living wage. Government, I can figure out what our internal policies are that make our programs and services more accessible. So every position, every person around your leadership table can certainly play a role, but the common agenda has to be something that you all hold in common and that no individual organization can achieve on its own. And it's really driving towards population level change.
So that's all the questions that we have right now. Does anyone have any last minute questions they want to throw in there?
If not, we can just move to our final kinds of slides.
Oh, we do have one. During the early years, how to monitor progress towards the ultimate outcomes when your evaluation is focused on collective impact initiatives and intermediate outcomes.
Yeah, so you want to, in the very, very early stages of your collective impact work, in assessing the environment and even in developing your plan, there are some things you want to pay attention to. And really, I would look at the preconditions and the conditions of collective impact. And so the preconditions are influential champions, urgency of the issue, and adequate resources. And so influential champions are, do we have the right connections to people in the community that if we said, okay, we're going to work on high school graduation, but we're connected to principals and to the education environment and to parents and to students, that we can move the needle on this, right? So do we have the right influences around our table? Do we have the right resources from a human and financial perspective? And does our community actually think there's urgency around this? And how would we know? How would we know about urgency? We would know that the issue was written about in the newspaper, people were talking about it on social media, it was a priority of our local government, it was a priority that organizations around the table said, hey, look, we've had a lot of incidences around opiate use in our community, we've got to do something about this, right? So look at the preconditions and look at the 5 conditions and frame your early stage evaluation around those. Do we have a common agenda that everybody around our table is owning? And how do we know that they're owning that? What would their behavior look like that showed that they were owning it? Well, a behavior might be that they show up at the meetings. A behavior might be that they say, okay, I work at Tamarack and I've bought into this issue, and so we're going to do a webinar on the issue to our members. A behavior change might be that we write about our involvement in this collective impact work in our newsletter, right? So you can actually begin to identify fairly early on around the preconditions and conditions behavior changes that you would hope for that helps build momentum and build community capacity around the common agenda. And once you start to see that, right, once you start to see your partners writing about the collective impact initiative in their newsletters, once you start to see them, thinking about their own internal policies and procedures, once you start to see them recruiting other members around the collective impact table, those are behavior changes, and that starts to say, look at what we're accomplishing together. We've attracted 7 business leaders. We have, 17 newsletters that have written about this collective impact effort, and their reach is out to 35,000 citizens in our community. You can see how, by being really intentional, you actually can get results in real time that give you actually even numeric indicators that can drive your change forward.
Thank you, Liz. I just want to actually draw attention to Timothy. He is working in Arizona on a collective impact, and he put in a lot of questions to your question.
Oh, okay, great.
He's got, there's 7 or 8 questions, and I just want to say thanks, Timothy, for putting those questions in there. And maybe afterwards we might be able to see how we can help you with questions.
Yeah, so maybe what we'll do is we will bring them forward to our post-event email, and if there are tools and resources out there, we'll provide some links to some of the tools and resources that we particularly like at Tamarack or other ones that we've seen. Or, Timothy, maybe what we could do is engage in a telephone call. So send me an email, and sometimes a quick chat, half an hour chat on the phone, helps give you a path forward for your next step. So, at Tamarack, we're always open to those kinds of things, so please feel free to reach out to us as well.
Well, thank you, Liz. I don't know about you, but my brain is damn full. You talked about 4 elements of evaluation. You talked about stages and phases of evaluation. You talked about key learning questions for evaluation. And then you talked about resources and tools for evaluation. And then you answered a whole whack of questions. So this webinar is jam full of great tools, resources, and ideas. And if you feel like your question hasn't been answered, please reach out to myself or Liz, and we will see what we can do to help. So just to end the webinar, we have lots of tools, resources that you can access. We have a community engagement event happening in March in Vancouver. We have another webinar on January 24th about building sustainability, and Liz did talk about a collective impact community of practice. And so if you go to our website, you will find a list of all of our community of practices that we have. And the collective impact one is coming up on February 2nd, and we're going to be talking about backbone structures, looking at other people's structures and talking about what has worked and what hasn't. But you need to sign up and become a member to be part of the discussion. And so I encourage you to go to our website for all tools and resources. And we've had a lot of questions about this webinar, presentation, resources. I will send every one of you a post email with everything that Liz talked about in terms of the resources and tools, some of the follow-up to questions, and I will put a link into the community of practice so it'll be easy for you to find it.
And one more thing to say, for those of you that are struggling with the behavior change question, we have a webinar coming up called Hardwired Humans, and it's actually it's done by a guy named Andrew O'Keefe, who's from Australia, and he's going to talk about behavior change and how to really pay attention and get to better outcomes, understanding the 9 things that are hardwired in each of us, and then how do we change our communities based on these 9 things. So I don't have the date for that or the advertising, but if you went to the Tamarack community site, you'd be able to sign up for that webinar as well.
All right, thank you very much, everyone, and have a great afternoon.